So welcome to my final major project. A little recap. So this brief is tasking me with creating a highly educative environment that will showcase the finds and the history of Sutton Hole. The feedback that I garnered from my last presentation was that I need to make sure the main focus of this exhibition is sort of on the educative side and not so much the models, as they'll just be a benefiting and a more enticing factor. So is my project. My project is all about educating people on what it is that happened at Sutton Hole. So with the archaeology, the teams, the finds, and what that's meant for history. So the main aspects of it are going to be the models, the educational panels that will give the information, the excavation site, which I'll explain later, and there's only a couple of other little bits. So for me to get a good grasp and understanding of this exhibition, which will be sort of like a small museum, I needed to look at what it is that creates an optimal museum and how things like pathing works and what beneficial layouts there are. So after looking at some published papers like this one by Mitchell Ethan, I started to understand what it is that museum layouts and optimal traversal theory is. Um, Even though mine is just gonna be like sort of a box room, like a large set of rooms in a large area, it'd still be nice to understand how it works so I can get a grasp on it. So the basis of it looking into graph theory, and one of the big things is called a Hamiltonian cycle. So graph one, the top one, that is not Hamiltonian because it doesn't connect all the way through. As you can see with B and D, they don't connect, whereas graph 2 does. You can traverse it via A through B, D, C, and then back to A. So this relates to the idea of being able to go through every single room without having to walk through the same room twice. I'll explain how that's going to come to my practices later. So these are my stints. So obviously I had my weeks 1 to 3 stints, which was research planning museum theory. After that it was sort of weeks 4 through 6, and that was starting on the complex modelling, defining which models that I wanted to continue on through with. And then because I had to find the intricate normals, so it narrowed down the modelling quite a lot. So obviously I need to do normal baking and texturing. Weeks 8 to 10 was finalizations of models, and then it came down to like baking the textures, the normals, the bump maps, and then starting to create the educational panels in InDesign. And then weeks 11 to 12 is Sketchfab and just general finalization of the project. So preparing the space. So with planning, I wanted to follow the idea of having this Hamiltonian cycle, but for the models and educational panels as well. So instead of using it for different rooms, so traversing through rooms, I'll use it for the models and how it's going to be easier to get through A through B or A through D or whatever it is. And how it's going to be beneficial to have this sort of like free choice when traversing, and how I can incorporate the reading panels into that theory. So lighting, when it comes to lighting, I have to take 4 things into consideration. So visibility is obviously making sure that the collection is visible, whilst making sure that it isn't bleached by light with reflections and refractions from glass. Interest will be highlighted via the light to make sure that people know where it is that they want to look. Presentation is making sure that it is optimally presented to look the nicest it possibly can. An environment is to make sure that people look at the right things at the right time with illumination and other things. The other image at the bottom is looking into lumens and what is the optimum lumens to use. So if you look at the 100,000 lux times that obviously is 1,000 lux hours, that's roughly how much a sort of archaeological piece can last under certain light conditions before it starts to deteriorate. This is mainly looking at a lot of artwork, like paintings, but it will still apply to models. So if I wanted to make this look as realistic as possible, the ideal lux would be 50, because then it can hold a piece for 2,000 hours. So I need to be able to factor this into my exhibition because I want to make it look as realistic as possible. I think the way that I'm going to do this is by using a HDRI of a gallery or a museum to make sure the lighting is matched, and then proceeding to use highlight spots for the models. Therefore, it'll allow people to realise which parts are important and which parts aren't. So, educational material. Since this is an educational project, sourcing the correct information and making it digestible is my top priority. So therefore I sourced my information from numerous different websites and made sure that it was all credible. It was generally British Museum, and there is a website on Google, or there is a Google ran website for arts and culture that is all about different museums, different models, and their sort of inputs on history. Once I collected this, it was time to put it into an exhibition, and the main question I had for myself was how would I fit this into the presentation of the actual environment. So I went through and I used PureF and just started putting lots of different images in. These were the top ones that I came out with of different ways that people have done it. Obviously, graphic design has a massive impact on how it is presented. And I think that the best one that would allow a lot more free traversal is the top left one, which is a sort of series of posters and billboards. I was going to do it on the walls, however, lighting was a little bit of an issue. So I think the best way that I could possibly do it is going to be via the stand-up boards. So this is the development process of it. So the top left was the very first sort of rendition of the information boards I did. I thought they were okay, but it's not exactly enticing and it's not standout. And also, if one person's reading it or one set of people are reading it, nobody else can read it at that time. So instead, when I moved to the larger boards, it allowed for people to read that from far away or surrounding it, whilst people can, traverse through and read the other boards. So the models, I limited myself to 4 models, which I decided on the buckle, the shield, the cauldron, and the sword. The reason I did this was down to sourcing normals, which I'll speak about more in detail afterwards, but also creating PBR based textures and also procedural textures. I think that these ones had the most detail in them, in the sense of being able to get it out on time while still keeping a high or retaining a high standard of quality. So these are the ones that I went with. So these are just some of the images. Unfortunately, on them, which I'm really I think this is something that would be a reflective part. I can't source some of the normals for the parts, which means that some are missing, like on the shield. Like if I show you, the shield has the eagle and the sword hilts, whereas on mine, I can't access it. I can't find them. So that has been a little bit of a bummer, but I think it's something that I need to figure out and work with. So then it came to normal sourcing. So sourcing the normals for these models has been extremely difficult because there are so many sort of parameters that need to be met for it to work. So generally, I needed closer up images because of the amount of detail that are in the models. I also needed images without like sort of light bleed, where it would reflect from one surface onto another. But unfortunately, with the fact that they're in these museum cabinets, not a lot has happened for that. There's no images where they aren't on display. And I also need minimum reflections from things like glass, the actual item itself, because any light would take away from the detail. So as you can see on the right hand side, these are some of the normals I created. The bottom one, the buckle, was the hardest to find. I think it took like 2 weeks to actually source it, find it, and get it to work. But like on the shield, the 2 parts that are missing are way more intricate than these, and the only way that I could do it without a normal would be for me to go in and hand sculpt every single part of it, which I don't have the time for, because there is that much detail in them. So onto the excavation site. After a meeting with Juan, we looked at the idea of having an excavation site underneath the exhibition itself to try and add this layer of depth to it. So I made a PBR texture for the soil and used really basic materials for the actual ship itself. Therefore, the soil would retain this constant look, and you can add like lots of different modifiers onto it to make it look really, really good. But I think overall the actual excavation site adds a really interesting element to the exhibition because you can see to a certain extent where these models have come from, and where the environment that it was founded in. My plan is to upload the final project into Sketchfab. These softwares will allow me to be able to add interactive points onto the environment, which will be sort of like highlights. There'll be information panels, which may add additional information or save in the process of creation of the models and the assets onto the actual 3D model itself. And then there's also 3D maneuverability with Sketchfab, where you can cycle around the project, you can zoom in, you can pick which part you really want to look at, which I think will be good from highlighting the detail that I've put into it. So overall, I really need to make sure the main focus of this project is all about the education. The models may be one of the big attractions and interests, but the main thing is making sure the educational material is digestible and accessible. Thanks for listening. Any questions?